How's it going, YouTube? Coincidence here with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be the Striker Masterclass. Now, this is going to be pretty different than what you're used to, probably. Today, I'm going to be doing more of a tribute as to what I've done with the deck so far, and really been able to understand and learn, and be able to portray that to you as far as the different ways that the deck can just adapt to formats, the deck list that I currently have, the nuances of the deck, how certain cards interact with the format, what the format looks like right now, what our matchups are, what the deck has evolved from, what the cards are that are forgotten and why they're forgotten, and different kind of like tech cards and options that you could use in the deck. And I do hope that you enjoy today's video because it's going to be pretty long-winded, but there's going to be a lot of good information in there too. But definitely go ahead and check my sponsors over on Gem, Cloud, Arla, Imperium, Dragonshield, RW, MainPhaze, and Grimoire. Definitely go ahead and check my coaching over on METAFY for one-on-ones. And then also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already so we can hit our goal at 30,000. I'd really appreciate it. Now, without further ado, let's hop right into the lesson. We have several cards in Striker that are quote-unquote forgotten, but there's good reason for it, because there are certain cards that have realistically replaced what these cards are doing, but there is a couple cards here that I could talk on as far as still having some use case. But the first one here is going to be Burner. I like Burner a lot. I think that this card really can never be replaced just because it does too much. I really don't like targeting destruction. That's why I don't really like Fallen and Virtuous, even though a lot of people love that card. But that's another reason why Burner kind of phased out, because a lot of people are preferring Fallen and Virtuous to this. And this is still something that I like because it is searchable in the deck and it can break a board very quickly. But it is something that has seen a lot more niche play rather than being popular like it used to. Shark Cannon's up next. This is a card that I don't really like anymore. This is a card that I've always bumped down to 1 anyway. It was really important back in the day when you needed to just like steal everybody you could, then make a Boral Sword and try to like beat your opponent at that point, right? But now it's a lot less important to do this, and there's not a lot of like great steals anymore. You used to be able to like steal Baron and then tag out Baron in the standby phase to go back into Raye, right? There's a couple like really crazy things that you could do, and now Shark Cannon, it just is like pretty lackluster. And if you see it and you're starting 5, especially going second, it feels kind of bad. It's not going to do anything immediately. This is a card that you really want to like search out. And you want to see cards now that are just going to do things like on the spot. Vision, Super Poly, Droplet, things that are going to be really impactful on the spot. Ego Booster is kind of the same thing. We saw this for a little while for like a Rise Heart, which was kind of funny that this was like a tech option. But this is something that's really phased out because of cards like Linkage. Because before, you're trying to dodge like Imperms, Veilers, Destructions, Removals. Now you just linkage your monster away, right? So Ego Booster, while it is still a pretty okay card, not necessarily all too needed anymore. And if you really wanted to, you could just like crown your link monster and call it a day, right? So don't really need Ego Booster, even though again, this is the searchable copy, but not necessarily all too popular anymore. The next one I'll go over is gonna be Area Zero. This is a card that is just a field spell that requires there to be another card on the board, and then still having the opportunity to whiff on this card. It's just something that is kind of been timed out with where we're currently at. And it's still a really unique card, and you're still able to like summon Raye off of it. But like, there's a time and a place where this would have been important, but now we have so many more ways to Raye, and we also have Kagari 4, 5, 6, and that's mostly why we don't run multi-roll anymore between 0, Kagari, and Lemnisgate, because no matter what we lose, we can just recycle it and then 6 Kagari it back, right? So not necessarily the most needed card anymore, even though multi-roll fills a specific niche. I feel like this card could see play at some point, but as of right now, it's not necessarily going to be the most important thing for the deck. Which is crazy, because I used to think that once this card got banned, the deck would just die. But then we got some of the most overbearingly broken support we could have ever asked for. So, you know, that's how cards kind of work, though. Some things stick along for the ride, and other things are pretty much phased out. Now, this one's pretty non-negotiable. This deck is a 40 count deck, realistically 37 or 38, depending on how many upstarts you're playing, right? And at that point, they're just like free spells in the grave and free draws. And that's why Upstart is so unbelievably broken in this deck. I only play 2 because I had to make room for other things. But at the end of the day, you are playing the 40 count deck with a couple upstarts in there that the second you see them, it's just something else, right? Which is really good. 40 cards, don't go above this. It's just not great when you can't see your visions, your engages, your linkages, your copies of Raye, right? Like things that you desperately want to see in your hand. You don't want to go over and risk just like not seeing them. Raye and Roze are the heart and soul of the deck. Now, I really hate Roze. I'm like the #1 Roze hater. So I only play one even with desires, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. But Roze itself does have some very interesting use case. We used to use this to go ahead and negate things like Dragoon, because if you out your opponent's EMZ monster, you can summon a Roze from the graveyard and then non-targeting negate a monster. But it's really important to have Roze in the mirror, because let's say that you have Roze in grave and they have Raye, and you pop their Shizuku. You go Chainlink 1, Roze, they go Chainlink 2, Raye. Raye summons, then Roze summons and negates the Raye. So they can't randomly tag out Raye. They can, but it's just going to resolve negated, right? So this is going to be a really crazy tip for the mirror match, is having Roze in the grave is pretty optimal. The other thing that you have to know is if you use Raye effect to summon a Link monster, it is not properly summoned and can't get reborned. This is how we played in 2019 to make sure that our opponent couldn't reborn our one of Kagari and get free advantage, because we simply would just use Raye effect to summon the Kagari out. And this is why we used Hercules base back in the day, to make sure that we could recycle that as well as needed. If you ever saw somebody just like hard link into Kagari in the mirror match, they either desperately needed it to resolve, or they just like didn't understand that that was a thing, right? So it was really, really important to see that if Kagari was at 1 and your opponent uses Raye effect to summon Kagari, they probably know how to play the deck really well, right? So that was kind of just like a check in the mirror to see like how good your opponent was at playing the strategy. But this is true till today. You know, if you are keeping track of what was summoned how, and your opponent goes to like summon out a monster of yours, you need to be able to be like, that was not properly summoned. The other part of this is if you read that there is a super poly set by your opponent, when you normal Raye, you have turn player priority to activate a quick effect first. Normal Raye, effective Raye immediately. Because at that point, your opponent can't just like on summon flip super poly. You have turn player priority to activate a quick effect. Raye, tribute, summon 0. It doesn't matter, right? It's the same thing if your opponent has like a Mirror Jade. You want to just go normal Raye, effective Raye. You don't want to just go normal Raye, summons fine, they go activate Mirror Jade. It's just a very awkward thing to have happen, because you tag into a random link, they banish the link, you summon back out Raye, and they like fall in a virtuous your Raye, right? Now all of a sudden you're in a fairly awkward position. Now let's start with the main question here. Is desires needed? In my opinion, not necessarily needed, but definitely very wanted. And this is because if you're going second, you can look at your hand and auto rip desires and get those extra 2 cards going. You have 1 spell in grave. You see everything that you need to see because you have all your breakers set up. And this is why at the start of your turn, you're ripping your vision, you're hitting up your upstarts, you're doing your desires. And if you don't have to rip desires right away, if you're going first, it should be like the last card that you activate, unless you like desperately need it. Going second, it's probably the first card I'm activating, because I want to see all of my options. We never look at desires as a banish 10. We look at it as a draw 2 and a spell engrave, and that's fantastic. Now, do you need to bump numbers in your deck list to make sure that you can compensate for the banish? You probably should. I play 1 Lemnisgate and 1 Roze, and this is because I'm very specific with my ads, and I get certain things out of deck before I rip desires. Sometimes you just run into a situation where you can't help it, right? You just have to rip it. But a lot of times I'm doing combos to get the Lemnisgate out of deck first at the very least. If you're going first and you open Raye desires, you're going to go Raye tag into 0, 0 at engage, engage at linkage, linkage into Kagari, and then you're going to add back your engage, and then add Lemnisgate. Now you have a live Lemnisgate after you link off your Kagari into Suzuku, which is probably going to add you Hornet Drone, so you have a follow-up ace monster to use if anything happens. And you have the best interruption possible, right? And then before you go into your end phase with Shizuku, you're going to rip your desires, draw 2, and then be able to identify at that point what you need to add, which is, again, if you didn't banish it, usually going to be your Hornet Drone. If you just open Roze, you have to do the really awkward line of going normal summon Roze, go into Shizuku, end phase, Shizuku add linkage, linkage into 0, 0 add engage, right? So you at least have that interruption for your end board, but you're not going to be able to rip that engage until the following turn. So you kind of got to hope that the rest of your hand was like pretty okay. Now, what quick plays do you want to run? Because the vision package is going to be the most important here. Having 3 vision and 1 MST is so fantastic for the deck. This is such a good engine to add because of the fact that we already run 3 mandatory droplet. Card is fantastic. You're running 3 linkage, 2 to 3 anchor, and 1 to 2 Lemnisgate. So you already have a ton of quick plays in the deck to make sure that you can either draw or you can just rip it and add MST, which is unironically still a very good card. Now, most people still run Fallen and Virtuous. I run Super Poly, and it's realistically one or the other because you are taking up extra X spaces with this. I prefer Super Poly because there's always going to be times where like you can't out a lot of bodies all at once, and Super Poly really gives you the availability to do so. Because usually, if you're going to Super Poly, you're outing like at least 2, right? Unless you're running like Triffy Verdum like me. And then you can start running over bodies on the board and really start breaking the board down to where you want it to be. Let's say that you're even playing against like Branded, right? And you go Super Poly, 2 light spellcasters into Garura, and then you can go ahead and like swing over 2 bodies, and then you can go link into Zeke, Chainlink 1, Zeke to banish, Chainlink 2, your Garura to draw, or however you want to do it, right? So there's going to be a lot of reasons why Super Poly can come up. There's going to be a lot of reasons why Fallen and Virtuous can come up. So it's really going to be up to you to determine which one you prefer and which one better suits your playstyle. The biggest possible issue that could happen is going to be using the second effect of 0 and getting Ash or Belled. Usually that means that you are without a link, and that is why sometimes it's crucial to make sure that you have linkage set so that you're not just like out a monster and potentially just going to lose because you're directly wide open. Now, we are playing post side, cross out going first, and then we are playing the called by. So this is going to be rather important to make sure that this scenario happens as least as possible. And this is why you see me add Hornet Drone a lot, to always make sure that I have some kind of ace for the following turn. This is a very real scenario that can happen, and you've got to make sure that you are prepared in case this is what happens, because it's brutal. I've had it happen to me a couple times where it really mattered, and if you didn't have an ace for the follow-up turn, you probably lost. You also got to make sure that you just like are in a position where you can't lose, because if your opponent pops your Link monster and you summon Raye in defense and just go Crown, right? A lot of times you are going to be in a very good position because you have Raye for the following turn guaranteed. They can't out it, and this is just like something that's now just on your board, right? Until they decide to pass. So definitely going to be a really good usage of your cards. I think Crown in general should just be a mandatory staple in the deck now. Card is just so unbelievably broken. And I feel bad because it's very expensive and people are like, so is there a different card that I could use instead of Crown? And there's really no answer. Because what else is just going to completely just dud a card, right? Like, that's the best way to put it. You watch your opponent summon something that's important and just go Crown, right? And all of a sudden you're just like, oh. You know, just like, what do you do with it? And it's very awkward. And that's something where a card like this is just so valuable, because in Striker, you want to make sure that you're getting as much value out of each card as possible. And I mean every card. So a card like Crown that can just like 1-for-1 trade, you can't respond with monsters, that card just can't be used. What a fantastic card for a deck like this. Now, we really have to understand Gate in the deck. So this card is your heart and soul. This is going to be the card that will recycle everything. Have you ever been Zaborged for 8 monsters and then still won because you just Lemnisgate everything back? I have. And it's kind of crazy because this one card just changed the game so much for the deck, because it's something that you can have monsters in your main monster zone and still be able to play the game, which is crazy, right? You still have something that you can just use. And you can bounce your own cards too, which is kind of funny. Doesn't happen a lot, but it can come up. And this is something where you don't even have to return. You can return. So if you just gotta recycle, you can just activate the card and just recycle. And it's for every 3 that go back, so you need an equal number of monsters and spells. This card is so unbelievably good for the archetype. I talked earlier about how I don't really like Burner and I don't really like Fallen and Virtuous because they target. This card doesn't even target, which is just so unreal. There's a lot of times in the grind game where your opponent starts setting cards for the end phase and you just bounce them back to their hand. And then you're like, my turn, right? So this card, when you use it, you got to make sure the first thing you're doing is getting back to it. If you have more than one copy in your deck, then you can just like search it. But where I only run 1, I have to be very careful with how I use this, because I always have to Kakari it back, or I have to like 0 it back, right? I can't just go immediately for like an engage. And this is where I'm still in my internal dilemma on running 1 or 2. I know 2 sounds correct, but it's the same thing as like if you hard open this card and it's just like in your hand, I feel like it's just not doing anything like immediately, right? Like I'd rather get to it later. But it's still a very valuable card and something that's really important in the toolbox that is Striker. Getting a 3rd spell engrave is going to be the #1 priority for most players when they play Striker, because they want to be able to get the draws off engage. But cards like Droplet are going to be the easiest way to do this, because you can just like throw spells engrave for cost, and whatever you activated prior, let's say you activate like engage, your opponent chains an Omni, you chain Droplet, negate the Omni, and send the engage. Your engage is now the 3rd spell engrave. You will draw after you search because it checks on resolution. Same thing with linkage. You have 2 engrave, you go activate engage, chain linkage. Linkage will then send the engage to grave. You'll summon like 0. Resolve engage, draw a card, and then like 0 back the engage. And now the linkage will be the 3rd spell engrave, so you can just go ahead and activate engage again and then be able to resolve for the draw. So it is pretty cool that you can do that in this deck, and it's something that you really want to think about in your gameplay, because not only is it important for the 3rd card draw, but let's say that your opponent has Rhapsodia, they target something that you activate engage, they go chain Rhapsodia, you can chain linkage there and get rid of your engage. And then now you can get a free link on board and your engage still resolves because the target was missed. I did this a lot with things like Flame, because the Flame has to have the target, right? They just lose the target when you chain something like linkage. One of the most important things to remember is end phase drone or linkage. If you started with Roze, it's linkage into 0 and then grab an extra engage. If you are doing standard line, you're just going to grab a drone, so you have a backup ace in case anything happens. Striker has always been known as being the tempo deck, and that's always true. Now, if you're playing a back row heavy deck, people are going to be siding back row hate cards for you. So you can't be siding in cards like Di-Fi, right, that are just going to be on the board and your opponent is just going to lightning storm them, because those are the cards that they're siding in for you. You want to have chainable back row. That's why DDG is such a perfect flood for Striker, because if your opponent does anything, you can just chain this, or in the draw phase, you're just ripping this anyways, right? So even if your opponent does have like a lightning storm, you don't really care, right? Because at that point, you're like, cool, the DDG is already active, it doesn't really matter. And this is where I get really conservative with my cards, because if I know that I'm playing against like Orchist, right, and I have DDG, and I am staring at like Crown, D-Ground, Anchor, Droplet, right? I'm probably either just setting D-Ground or I'm setting like D-Ground Crown. Because a lot of times if you just set the D-Ground, your opponent, they can't M-Steady, they can't really play, right? There's not a whole lot that they're going to do. The other thing is like you're never setting D-Ground and like called by, right? You're just setting D-Ground, because there's not a whole lot that they can do about the D-Ground going off anyway, and they're probably not able to really drop a hand trap on you or anything crazy in the draw phase. Unless they go like Prayer's Tribute something. At that point, if you know you're playing with Mitsurugi, then you could set the call by, just in case your opponent goes draw phase and they go Prayer Tribute, because they still have turn player priority to do something, right? So I always try to riff this even like to stand my phase just to see if they like are going to do something in the draw that I can chain this to. But otherwise, this is going to be the perfect card that you can play in the deck because you're going to be able to make sure that you survive the turn, and your opponent is really not going to be able to do a whole lot in their turn, so you control the tempo even more with cards like this. So this was just like a fishbowl hand on DB. We are going to activate the Mulcharmy, and we're going to assume that we're going to draw 2 cards, right? We activated it at an opportune time. Our opponent was at a weird board state, and now with us going second, we just drew 2 cards, and we drew for turn, we drew Raye. This is where I'm staring at the hand and I'm just trying to figure out where every card goes. If I'm playing against Doomsday, then I already know the call by is going to be reactive to the Regulus. If I have a matchup against like Cool Tune and I know they have like Remix, RS, right? The call by is going to end up answering the Remix. They're going to chain the RS to target the call by. I'm going to chain linkage to get rid of the call by and then summon out like 0, right? And now it's a very awkward spot for our opponent because they already lost the Remix. They already used the RS. Now they don't really have a lot more besides maybe like Clip and KTS. But we also have our Widow Anchor. So really understanding where your cards go and why is really important. Now the call by could let you play a little bit more ignorantly just because of the fact that you don't really care about things like Droll. But if you saw them on Bell and they have a lot of cards in hand, if they have Droll Bell and you play wrong here, this could be really problematic. But you still got to put them on better have both sometimes, right? So with this, it's really going to depend on how you want to play. You can chain the vision at any time, so you don't necessarily have to rip it in draw phase immediately. I feel like some people get that in their head where they're like, oh, draw phase has to be the draw effects, but you don't have to, especially if you can just chain it, because you want to give your opponent just more information about what your hand has than they need. Because this vision could also just add MST and go ahead and pop something that's a problem. If your opponent is on branded and they set like Retry, you're going to want to pop that. So probably here to start with Rhoda. Add another copy of Raye. You want to leave Roze in deck. You never want to put it in hand because you can't resolve 0 if it's in hand. You want to go Upstart next because your guaranteed searches are gone. So now you get your random draw off your Upstart. That's going to affect what the hand shows and what you're going to do. Now you have 2 spells in grave, and you can start really picking apart where you're at. You haven't used linkage yet, and you have Raye in hand. The linkage can help the 0 or the Kagari dodge a very problematic situation here. So I'd probably go like normal summon Raye, and then go Raye into 0, and then just kind of check what's going on. Is there an Imperium? Is there a Valor? Is there like Rhapsodia? Is there some kind of negate? Like what's going on, right? And if it resolves, cool, I get to add engage. If it doesn't, I'm probably chaining something like linkage and then going into like Hayate because I don't want to burn the Kagari right now because there's nothing really engraved that's valuable. You can always add back like the linkage, but it's not always the greatest, right? So now you're in a pretty advantageous position. You have linkage already engraved, which means you have 3 spells engraved. You haven't used the vision yet. If you needed to use the vision to out something with like MST, then you would have already done that. But there's a lot of different ways to look at the hand and how you can really go about breaking a board. And as given with the examples for things like KT and Doomsday, there are cards that it can show up in the hand that can auto-answer problematic situations. And you kind of just got to understand where those cards go. And we haven't even talked about using the anchor for the most part too, you know, so it really depends. This deck, I would say above all else, is just sequencing and making sure that you're getting the most value out of your cards at all times. Because there are so many different ways you can look at a hand like this, especially going second, and it really depends on the matchup. Because there are going to be different factors that go into this too. Your engage draws, your vision draws, or if you added MST, your upstart draw could be super poly here, right? Like, there's a couple things that could really change just off of a whim on one draw. So you really got to make sure that you understand going in. There's almost never just one line to go through a board. There's going to be like 5. And you got to make sure on the fly that you understand the benefits and the risks to doing each line. Because if you don't, you could be walking right into a trap, and all of a sudden you're out your ace monster, you're out of gas, and you missequenced, and that could cost you the game. Because this deck is not forgiving. You have to be able to sequence properly. Now, as for the current variants, the first one that's gonna definitely just be gone is gonna be the Radiant Typhoon one. Unfortunately, you know, this was a pretty cool one, but now with Chanta 1, I can't really see this being all too popular. Mitsu Striker is gonna be around for a while. This is still going to be a pretty great variant. I personally don't like it. I think that it's way too clunky. I get it. Pre-prep is 3 spells engrave, full combo, Mit, and Striker. It's very, very good. It's very, very strong. But it's still something that I'm not the biggest fan of. Although, in this variant, you can run Grisai Prison. So, very crazy tech card and something that is very beneficial to a deck like this. But Pure, honestly, is just going to be the variant that I feel like is going to be the best into next format, and it just has the best opportunity to do well. Now let's go over our top 5 matchups right now. The first one being Cool Tune. I always laugh and make this joke, but I think that it's so funny and it's so true. Your opponent can see the Super Poly, man. They can see it, but they can't do a lot about it. And a lot of people are like, oh, they can go down to like 1 monster and they don't really care. Cap. They're going to pass on Remix only? No, they're not going to do that against Striker. They're not going to do that. And, you know, cards like Theseus, their entire deck is tuners. Everything is a tuner. And you can hit that deck with a Super Poly every day of the week. And they can look directly at your hand and see it. But, man, is there little that they can actually do about it. It's relatively a very favorable matchup for Striker. Branded is tough. This is not impossible, but it is tough. And I know that I've gotten a couple comments about people being like, how do I beat this? You can play Secretarian with Super Poly, which is pretty nuts because you put your opponent in a very, very bad situation. They cannot use like half their deck, right? Probably like 80% of their deck. So definitely going to be something that you want to consider. But the branded matchup itself, they put up a lot of bodies. Like a lot. And this is something where you probably want to start playing more copies of like Elysian Thrust, and Regeki to really help you clear bodies. Because if you don't, it can be a very difficult matchup with how many bodies get put on the board. This is a very popular matchup right now, so I advise you to really spend time playing against it, because there are several ways that you can win this, including post side, triple D ground, right? It's just crazy, and you have so many draw cards in the deck. And going second into this without your like crazy floods or whatever, you really just have to focus on getting rid of monsters. That's probably your biggest bet here. So that's something that you're really going to have to keep in mind. Now, Elf Note variants, you're really just going to want to side in like your Ogres, because Ogre is going to be for Rhapsodia or Welcome Home, depending on which one they see first. But this deck is very, very difficult to beat if they're going first post side, because they do play Secret Village and they can get to it. So you want to make sure that even if you're siding in your Lava Golems, right, like you're just trying to get spellcasters off the board, just do what you can to try to get a spellcaster on the board. I used to play Typhoon, and that was a really cool Striker tech card that can just like pop something. It's basically a hand trap, which is kind of cool. It is very niche, and you have to be able to beat the Rhapsodia as well. So definitely going to be an uphill battle, but something that is not impossible. So something just to keep in mind. Doomsday, this is a pretty favorable matchup for us. This is honestly is not that bad. If you have Lemnisgate or Droplet, you can deal with the Drastrius pretty easily. And the Regulus with the Verudurus, that is just something that Striker is very accustomed to dealing with, right? Breaking boards is literally in the job description for Striker. That is not really a big concern. The only crazy concern in this deck is the fact that Drastrius is going to be untargetable. But again, we can deal with that. That's fine. But just make sure that, you know, post side, you have in your Ogres, you have in your back row blowouts, and you have your droplets ready to go, right? This is going to be a grind game and a half, but you should be able to come out on top. A lot of times going second into this deck, you are just trying to break a board. Put in your lava golems. If you're playing Kaijis, put those in. Because if your opponent chains the trap to their Drastrius, you're going to be under a Colossus-esque effect. But if you can just go ahead and start outing things that are problematic, you're going to be okay. The last one here being Mitsurugi. This one can be very problematic. I don't love this matchup, and I know that it's pretty even Steven both ways, just because of the fact that like this deck puts up a lot of advantage, but so do you. And they have a lot of big bodies in this deck that you can go ahead and just like steal and attack with. My favorite thing about this matchup is Crown, because if they summon something like Mirakumo that's going to be a problem, they like activate it, you can just Crown it. And you're in a pretty advantageous position. Just make sure that they already activated Prayer that turn, because if they chain Prayer to Crown, it's a waste of a card, right? You really just got to pay attention to like what's activated, where they're at in their turn, what searches have already been done, what they're going to be going to next. These are all really important when you're looking at sequencing in this deck, because if you're playing against something like Mitsurugi, it's pretty telegraphed what they're going for. So as long as you can kind of read where they're at in their turn, you know exactly where to start throwing your interrupts. They go Ritual, summon from hand, summon Habakiri, they add back Ritual, summon from deck, chain 0, pop Habakiri, right? Put them on, have a Ritual in hand. If they don't, they're in a really bad spot. And, you know, these are the things that you really got to pay attention to. And Super Poly, again, I will preach this card to the day I die. Super Poly in this matchup is broken. The card's so crazy. Play against this deck, Trifivert him. That's rough. It's rough. And you put it in the EMZ so you can link it away too. It's so good. It's actually so good. But definitely some very interesting matchups this format, but definitely nothing that I would deem unwinnable. Everything here is very winnable. It just depends on how you go about your turn and how you make your deck list for the format. Now, not a lot has changed in my list since the last couple tournaments that I've been in. A lot of it's been like the side and the extra. I am playing 3 Ogre and 3 Lava now. I cut the Lancias. But the extra deck, I am playing the Secretarian right now over the Trifiverdum. If I want to cut down on other cards, then I could think about that and adding in other targets. But for now, I'm just playing the 4. I have the Secretarian in there for Branded. I have the Theseus in there for Cool Tune, and then the other 2 are just for generic matchups. The Double Crown, Triple Droplet, Triple Super Poly, and the Triple Vision are all the quick plays that are outside the main engine, just to be able to get the extra draws and what have you. And then the Desires are in there with 1 Rose and the 1 Lemnisgate. I might bump Lemnisgate up to 2. I still haven't decided yet. It's something that is really preferential up to your own playstyle and how specific you are with your deck building. I got a couple questions about Flame and if it could be Accusation. It absolutely could. I feel like Accusation is a wonderful card right now, and that's something that could definitely just replace Flame. Just for the time that this was at, I was running Flame prior. You could go ahead and just run the Accusation. You also could be on a better ratio with like Thrust and D-Ground. Just play like 2 Thrust and a D-Ground. I play 3 just to make sure that it's guaranteed. A, it's something that I can just draw into. My opponent doesn't know about it. B, it's something that if your opponent doesn't interact with you and you open Thrust and you're going first, that feels really bad. And it really depends on like how the duel goes at that point and like what you're drawn into. And, you know, one of the things that I wouldn't want to see is just like a card that doesn't do anything on its own, right? And things like Thrust and Talent, that's why I don't run Talent, doesn't do anything on its own. If my opponent doesn't interact with me, it's just like really bad. It's really good if you look at your opponent's hand, you're able to rip something, right? But they don't interact with you, it's rough. But at the end of the day, this is the list that I'm running, and this is the list that I feel very confident with. Definitely let me know if you end up trying out this list yourself, and let me know what you like about it, what you don't like about it. Well, that was an absolute ton of information, and I do hope that it helped you out in your future gameplay. If it did, let me know down below in the comment section. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and Instagram, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thank you.